The evening sky had turned a deep purple as Lily Taylor drove home from her law class. She was tired but happy. Her professor had praised her work on the mock trial, and she couldn't wait to tell her dad about it. The streets were quiet in this part of town, with only a few cars passing by. Lily stopped at the four-way intersection, counting the full 3 seconds like her father had taught her years ago when she was learning to drive. "Always come to a complete stop, count to 3, then go," he would say. She smiled at the memory as she continued her journey home. The flash of blue and red lights in her rearview mirror caught her by surprise. Lily checked her speedometer. She wasn't speeding. She signaled and pulled over to the shoulder, her heart beating a little faster. She'd never been stopped before. Following what her father had taught her, Lily rolled down her window, turned off the engine, and placed her hands where they could be seen on the steering wheel. The police officer took his time approaching, his flashlight beam sweeping across her back seat before landing on her face, making her squint. "License and registration," the officer demanded without introducing himself. His nameplate read Officer Daniels. He looked to be in his 40s, with a stern face that seemed permanently set in a frown. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" Lily asked politely as she handed over her documents. "You ran that stop sign back there," Officer Daniels said, his tone suggesting he wasn't interested in discussion. Lily was confused. "Sir, I'm certain I came to a complete stop." "I always do, especially at that intersection." The officer's face hardened. "Are you saying I'm lying, miss?" "No, sir, I'm just—" "Step out of the vehicle," he interrupted, taking a step back and resting his hand on his belt. Lily felt a chill run through her that had nothing to do with the evening air. Something didn't feel right. "Officer Daniels, have I done something wrong besides the alleged stop sign?" "Alleged?" His voice rose. "Now you're definitely getting out of this car. Don't make me ask again." Lily slowly opened her door and stepped out, very aware of how alone they were on this stretch of road. No other cars had passed since she'd been pulled over. "You know," Officer Daniels said, his tone changing as he looked her up and down, "pretty girl like you shouldn't be out driving alone so late." Lily stood straight, trying to appear confident despite her racing heart. "It's only 8:30, sir." The officer moved closer, invading her personal space. "I could write you up for multiple violations tonight. Stop sign, broken taillight." "My taillight isn't broken," Lily said before she could stop herself. Officer Daniels smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "It will be when I check it again." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But maybe we can work something out. What do you say we discuss this over coffee sometime?" Lily felt her stomach turn. "I'd like to call my father, please." "Your daddy can't help you right now," Officer Daniels laughed. "But I'm feeling generous. How about your phone number instead of a ticket?" Lily took a deep breath. "Sir, I'd like to have another officer present, preferably a female officer." The change in Officer Daniels was instant. His fake smile disappeared, replaced by anger. "You think you're smart, huh? Let me tell you something. I can make your life very difficult." What Officer Daniels didn't know was that Lily's father, Tom Taylor, wasn't just any dad. He was Special Agent Taylor, a veteran FBI agent who specialized in public corruption cases, and his daughter knew exactly what to do in this situation. Lily said nothing more as Officer Daniels wrote her ticket after ticket for violations she hadn't committed. She memorized his badge number, noted the time, and carefully observed that his body camera light wasn't on. When he finally let her go with 3 tickets and a warning to think about her attitude, Lily drove away with hands shaking but mind clear. As soon as she was safely home, she would make a call not just to report a bad cop, but to set in motion events that would reveal just how big a mistake Officer Daniels had made tonight. Lily's hands wouldn't stop shaking as she drove home. The 3 tickets Officer Daniels had given her were tossed onto the passenger seat, each one for something she hadn't done. Her mind kept replaying his words, his looks, the way he stood too close. The whole thing felt wrong. She pulled into her driveway and sat for a moment, gathering herself. The porch light was on, which meant her mom was probably waiting up. Lily didn't want to worry her, but she needed to talk to her dad right away. Inside, the TV was on low volume. Her mother looked up from her book, her smile quickly fading when she saw Lily's face. "What happened?" she asked, putting her book down. "Is Dad still awake?" Lily asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He's in his office. Lily, you're pale as a ghost. Lily gave her mom a quick hug. I'll explain everything in a bit. She walked down the hall to where the soft glow of a desk lamp spilled from her father's office. Special Agent Tom Taylor was reviewing case files, his reading glasses perched on his nose. One look at his daughter, and he said everything aside. "What's wrong?" he asked, instantly alert. Lily told him everything: the traffic stop, the false accusations, the inappropriate comments, the threats. Her father listened without interrupting, his face growing more serious with each detail. Only the tightening of his jaw showed how angry he was becoming. He didn't use his turn signal when he pulled out behind me, so I knew he was following me before he even turned on his lights, Lily said. And I swear, Dad, I stopped at that sign. I always do. Her father nodded. I believe you. Did you get his name and badge number? Officer Daniels, badge number 4587. His body camera wasn't on, the light wasn't blinking, and there was no dash cam that I could see in his patrol car. Tom looked impressed. You noticed all that? I remembered what you taught me, Lily said, and those classes in criminal procedure didn't hurt either. A hint of pride crossed her father's face before he turned serious again. Did you record any of it? Lily shook her head. I was afraid he'd get angrier if I tried to reach for my phone, but I remembered every word. Her father picked up a legal pad and handed it to her. Write it all down while it's fresh, every detail you can remember. As Lily wrote, her mother came in. Tom explained the situation in a quiet voice, and Lily could hear the controlled anger in his tone. Her mother's face showed shock, then outrage. So what happens now? Her mother asked when Lily finished writing. First thing tomorrow, we file a formal complaint with the department, Tom said. We go through proper channels. But you're FBI, Lily said. Can't you do something directly? Tom shook his head. That would be an abuse of power. We follow procedure, but we make sure the procedure works. He took the legal pad and read through Lily's statement. This officer has probably done this before. People who abuse power rarely do it just once. What if they don't believe me? Lily asked. The thought had been bothering her since the incident. It's my word against his. I have contacts in internal affairs, her father said. I'll make some calls, but not as an FBI agent, as a concerned father. We'll request any footage from traffic cameras in the area. If this officer has a pattern of behavior, other complaints might surface once someone starts looking. That night, Lily barely slept. She kept thinking about other young women who might have been stopped by Officer Daniels. Had they been scared into silence? Had they given him their phone numbers just to avoid tickets? The thought made her angry. The next morning, over breakfast, her father made a phone call to an old friend who worked in the police department's professional standards division. Hey, Mike, it's Tom Taylor. I need to talk to you about one of your officers. No, not officially. At least not yet. This is about my daughter. As her father continued the conversation, Lily felt a strange mix of emotions, still shaken by the previous night's events, but also relieved that something would be done. She didn't know it yet, but Officer Daniels' intimidation tactics were about to backfire in a way he never could have imagined. Mike Reynolds had known Tom Taylor for 15 years. They'd met during a joint task force operation and had stayed friends even as their careers took different paths, Mike to internal affairs and Tom to the FBI. When Tom called about his daughter's run-in with Officer Daniels, Mike listened carefully. I've heard whispers about this guy before, Mike said, leaning back in his office chair. It was early afternoon, and Tom had come down to the station to meet in person. Nothing solid enough for an investigation, but enough to make me wonder. Whispers like what? Tom asked. He'd taken the day off work after filing the official complaint with Lily that morning. Young female drivers getting pulled over for minor or made-up violations. A few complaints that were withdrawn suddenly. Mike pulled out a folder. 3 in the last year, all dismissed for lack of evidence or because the complainant stopped cooperating. Tom's eyes narrowed. That's a pattern. It is, Mike agreed. But without evidence or witnesses willing to testify, my hands have been tied. Your daughter's case might change things. Lily isn't backing down, Tom said firmly. And we're requesting all available camera footage from the area. Mike nodded. There's a traffic camera at that intersection. I've already put in the request. Should have it by tomorrow. What about his body camera? Daniels reported it as malfunctioning that night, Mike said with a frown. Convenient, isn't it? Tom wasn't surprised. And the dash cam? He claimed he forgot to turn it on. Mike looked frustrated. It's against policy, but first-time offense usually just gets a warning. First time getting caught, you mean, Tom corrected him. Mike sighed. Look, I want to nail this guy if he's dirty, but we need to do this by the book. If your daughter's statement doesn't match the traffic camera footage. It will, Tom said confidently. Lily doesn't lie. As they talked, across town, Lily was sitting in her criminal justice class, trying to focus on the lecture. Her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. Heard you filed a complaint. Big mistake. Might want to reconsider. Lily felt her heart pound. She showed the text to her friend Beth sitting next to her. That's creepy, Beth whispered. How did he get your number? Lily had been wondering the same thing. She hadn't given it to Officer Daniels during the stop. He must have access to the DMV database or something. That's illegal, Beth said, eyes wide. You should tell your dad right away. Lily nodded and stepped out of class to call her father. When she told him about the text, there was a long silence on the other end. Dad? Are you there? I'm here, he said, his voice steady but tight. Don't delete that message. I want to show it to Mike. Who's Mike? Internal Affairs. Threatening a witness is a serious offense, Lily. This just became much bigger than a traffic stop. When Tom showed the text to Mike, the Internal Affairs officer's professional demeanor cracked slightly. Using police resources to look up personal information and then intimidating a complainant, Mike shook his head. This guy's either incredibly stupid or he's been getting away with this for so long he thinks he's untouchable. Which is it? Tom asked. Honestly, probably both. Mike picked up his phone. I'm expediting that traffic camera footage request, and I'm pulling Daniel's patrol records for the last 6 months. Every traffic stop, every ticket. Tom nodded. What about other officers who patrol with him? Good thinking. Someone must have noticed something. Mike looked at Tom with newfound respect. You know, when this is over, you should think about coming back to local law enforcement. We could use more good cops. Tom smiled slightly. I'm happy at the bureau, but I appreciate the offer. As he left Mike's office, Tom called his wife to update her, then texted Lily, don't respond to any unknown numbers. We're making progress. That evening at dinner, Tom explained to Lily and her mother what was happening. Mike thinks there might be other victims who were too scared to come forward or who withdrew their complaints because they were threatened. Lily's mother asked, concerned. Possibly, Tom admitted, but now we have proof of intimidation. That text message changed everything. Lily pushed her food around her plate. I'm scared, but also angry. If he did this to me, he's definitely done it to others. Tom reached across the table and squeezed his daughter's hand. Being scared is normal. Being brave means acting despite that fear. And that's exactly what you're doing. What none of them realized was how quickly things were about to unravel for Officer Daniels. The traffic camera footage had just arrived in Mike's inbox. Mike sat at his desk, the glow of his computer screen lighting up his face in the dimly lit office. Most of his colleagues had gone home hours ago, but he couldn't tear himself away from what he was seeing. The traffic camera footage was crystal clear. It showed Lily's car coming to a complete stop at the intersection, waiting the required time, and then proceeding legally. There was no violation. Minutes later, Officer Daniels' patrol car appeared, following her without using his turn signal or lights until they were out of the camera's view. Mike picked up his phone and called Tom. You were right, he said when Tom answered. Your daughter made a complete stop. There was no reason for Daniels to pull her over. I knew it, Tom replied, the relief evident in his voice. What happens now? Now we dig deeper. I've got his patrol records for the past 6 months. There's something odd about them. What do you mean? Daniels issues twice as many tickets to women between 18 and 30 as any other officer in his unit. And get this, most of these stops happen on the same 3 stretches of road, all relatively quiet areas with minimal traffic, especially at night. Tom felt a chill run down his spine. He's targeting them. Exactly. And here's another thing. I've cross-referenced his patrol schedule with our complaint database. Those 3 women who filed complaints and then withdrew them, all of them received calls or texts from unknown numbers within 48 hours of filing. Just like Lily, Tom said grimly. I think it's time we bring in some of these other women. See if they'll talk now that we have evidence of a pattern. The next morning, Tom took Lily to the station to make an official statement. As they walked through the parking lot, Lily suddenly gripped her father's arm. That's him, she whispered. Tom looked up to see a uniformed officer walking toward the station entrance. He was tall with a military-style haircut, his posture rigid as he walked. This was the man who had threatened his daughter. Don't worry, Tom assured her. He can't do anything to you here. Inside, they were met by Mike and a female detective named Jenny Wong. Detective Wong led Lily to an interview room while Mike took Tom aside. We contacted the other complainants, Mike said quietly. 2 are willing to come forward again. The 3rd moved out of state, but she's agreed to give a statement by phone. That's good news, Tom said. There's more, Mike continued. We pulled Daniel's phone records. The text to your daughter came from a burner phone, but we've linked the purchase to his credit card. Tom shook his head. Not the brightest criminal, is he? They rarely are. But there's something else that's concerning. We found some unusual deposits in his bank account. $5,000, always in cash, deposited on the 15th of each month for the past year. Tom's eyes narrowed. Bribes? That's what we're thinking, but from who? And for what? Mike ran a hand through his thinning hair. This might be bigger than just harassment. In the interview room, Detective Wong was gentle but thorough as she took Lily's statement. When they finished, she asked an unexpected question. Did Officer Daniels mention anything about the local nightclubs during your encounter? Specifically about the Blue Door or Club 360? Lily thought for a moment. No, not directly. But I remember when he was writing my tickets, he got a call. He stepped away, but I heard him say something like, not tonight, I'm handling something. Tell Joe everything's clear on the west route. Detective Wong exchanged a look with Mike, who had just entered with Tom. The west route passes by both those clubs, Mike explained to Tom. We've had suspicions that some officers might be taking payments to ignore certain activities, drunk driving, drug transactions, even turning a blind eye to underage patrons. You think Daniels is part of it? Tom asked. I think he's just the tip of the iceberg, Mike replied. Those cash deposits line up with paydays at several clubs and restaurants owned by the same person, Joe Mendez. Outside the station, Officer Daniels sat in his patrol car watching the entrance. When he saw Lily and her father emerge with Mike and Detective Wong, his face hardened. He started his car and pulled away, not noticing the unmarked police vehicle that fell into place behind him. The net was closing in, and Officer Daniels had no idea how big of a mistake he had made when he decided to mess with an FBI agent's daughter. Joe Mendez sat behind his large wooden desk at the Blue Door nightclub, counting stacks of cash. The club wouldn't open for another 4 hours, but there was always business to handle beforehand. A knock on the door interrupted him. Come in, he called, quickly sweeping the money into a drawer. Officer Daniels walked in, looking nervous. His uniform was wrinkled, and dark circles hung under his eyes. We have a problem, Daniels said without greeting. That girl I pulled over last week? Her father's FBI. Joe's face darkened. And you're telling me this now? His voice was dangerously quiet. You said you'd take care of it. I tried. I sent her a message to back off, but they're not stopping. Internal Affairs has the traffic camera footage that shows she didn't run the stop sign. Joe leaned forward. Let me get this straight. You harassed the daughter of an FBI agent, got caught on camera, then used a phone linked to you to threaten her. He shook his head in disgust. You're a liability now. I need help, Joe. They're looking at my bank records. Joe stood up suddenly. Our arrangement is over. Get out of my club. As Daniels left, Joe picked up his phone and made a call. We need to clean house. Now. What Joe didn't know was that his conversation had been recorded. The Blue Door had been under surveillance for 3 days now, ever since Mike and Tom had connected the dots between Daniel's bank deposits and Joe Mendez's businesses. Across town in a van filled with monitoring equipment, Agent Wilson and two other FBI agents listened to the exchange through a bug planted by an undercover officer working as a bartender. "We've got enough to bring Mendez in for questioning," said Agent Kelly, one of Tom's colleagues. Tom nodded. "Let's coordinate with local police. Mike needs to know about this clean house order. His undercover people could be in danger." The investigation had quickly grown beyond a single corrupt officer. Tom had officially brought in the FBI once they discovered links between Joe Mendez and several suspected drug trafficking operations. What had started with Lily's traffic stop was now a full-blown joint task force operation. Back at the Taylor house, Lily was trying to focus on studying for her upcoming exams, but her mind kept wandering. Her mother sat down beside her at the kitchen table. "Your father called," she said. "He won't be home for dinner. Something about the case breaking wide open." Lily nodded. "Is it wrong that I feel responsible for all this? If I hadn't been pulled over." Her mother squeezed her hand. "Then Officer Daniels would still be out there targeting young women, and who knows how many more would have been harassed or worse. You stood up when others couldn't." "I had Dad to help me," Lily pointed out. "Not everyone has an FBI agent in their corner." "True," her mother acknowledged. "But now, because of you, there are a lot of good cops in their corner too." The doorbell rang unexpectedly. Lily's mother went to answer it, checking through the peephole first, a habit from years of being married to a federal agent. "It's Detective Wong," she said, opening the door. The detective looked serious. "Mrs. Taylor, Lily, I'm sorry to disturb you, but we need to move you to a safe location temporarily." "What? Why?" Lily asked, a knot forming in her stomach. "We intercepted a phone call suggesting that Joe Mendez, the man connected to Officer Daniels, has ordered what he called a clean house operation. We're concerned that might include intimidating witnesses." "Including me," Lily said quietly. Detective Wong nodded. "Your father asked me personally to escort you to a secure hotel. He's coordinating a series of arrests right now, but wanted to make sure you're both safe first." As they packed overnight bags, Lily felt a strange mix of fear and determination. She hadn't asked for any of this, but now she was part of something important, exposing corruption that had hurt people and would have hurt many more. "How many officers are involved?" she asked Detective Wong as they drove away from the house. "So far, we've identified 5 who were taking payments from Mendez, but there could be more." The detective glanced at her. "The evidence from your case was the key that unlocked everything. Your father is very proud of you." Outside the Blue Door, police cars and FBI vehicles were gathering, preparing to execute search warrants. Tom checked his watch. In 20 minutes they would move in, and Joe Mendez's operation would come crashing down, all because he had an officer on his payroll who made the mistake of harassing the wrong young woman. The raid on the Blue Door nightclub happened fast. Police cars, unmarked FBI vehicles, and SWAT team members surrounded the building just before opening time. Inside, Joe Mendez was caught completely off guard, his phone in hand as he was deleting messages. "FBI, don't move." An agent kicked open the office door, weapon drawn. Joe froze, then slowly raised his hands. "I want my lawyer." "You'll need one," Tom said, walking in behind the agent. He wasn't part of the arrest team, but he had special permission to observe. "Joe Mendez, you're under arrest for conspiracy, bribery of public officials, and obstruction of justice." As Joe was being handcuffed, his phone buzzed on the desk. Tom glanced at the screen and saw Officer Daniels' name. Across town, Officer Daniels sat in his patrol car, growing more anxious by the minute. He'd been trying to reach Joe for the past hour with no success. Something felt wrong. He decided to drive by the Blue Door to check things out. As he turned the corner, his heart sank. The street was filled with police vehicles, and officers were leading people out of the club in handcuffs. Daniels quickly put his car in reverse, but it was too late. An unmarked police car pulled up behind him, blocking his escape. Mike stepped out of the car and approached the driver's window. "Going somewhere, Daniels?" Officer Daniels' face went pale. "I was just patrolling the area." "Sure you were." Mike opened the door. "Step out of the vehicle. You're being placed on administrative leave pending an investigation." "You can't do this," Daniels protested weakly. "Actually, I can. We have you on record threatening a witness, misusing police resources, and taking bribes. Your badge and gun, please." In the hotel across town, Lily and her mother watched the local news coverage of the raid. The reporter stood in front of the Blue Door, where police were bringing out boxes of evidence. In a stunning development tonight, a joint FBI and police operation has resulted in multiple arrests at the Blue Door nightclub. Sources tell us the owner, Joseph Mendez, is suspected of running a protection racket involving several police officers. This investigation reportedly began after a complaint about police harassment filed by a local law student. Lily's mother squeezed her hand. "That's you." The hotel room phone rang. Lily's mother answered it and then handed it to Lily. "It's your father." "Dad, are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. We got them, Mendez, Daniels, and 3 other officers who were on the payroll. There's more to do, but the immediate threat is over. So we can go home." "Not quite yet. Detective Wong will stay with you tonight as a precaution. I'll come get you in the morning." He paused. "I'm proud of you, Lily. Your courage started all of this." After hanging up, Lily felt a strange mix of emotions, relief that the corrupt officers were caught, but also sadness that people sworn to protect the community had betrayed that trust. Detective Wong noticed her expression. "Penny, for your thoughts." "I just don't understand how those officers could do this. Weren't they supposed to be the good guys?" The detective sat down across from her. "Most officers are good people trying to do right by their communities, but power can corrupt anyone who isn't careful. That's why we need strong oversight and brave citizens willing to speak up when something's wrong." "Like filing a complaint?" Lily asked. "Exactly like that." Detective Wong smiled. "Your case is going to change things in the department. The chief is already talking about reforms to the complaint process and better monitoring of traffic stops." Later that night, as her mother slept in the other bed, Lily couldn't help but think about how differently things might have turned out if she hadn't stood up for herself, if she had just paid the tickets or given in to Officer Daniels' intimidation. A single traffic stop had uncovered corruption that had likely been going on for years. Tomorrow would bring interviews, statements, and eventually court appearances. But for tonight, Lily felt something she hadn't expected, a sense that sometimes one person really could make a difference. What she didn't know yet was that Officer Daniels, sitting alone in an interrogation room, had finally realized the magnitude of his mistake and was ready to talk. 6 months later, Lily sat in the back row of the courtroom, watching as Officer Daniels took the stand. He looked different now, thinner, paler, without the confident swagger he'd shown that night on the dark road. He wore a simple suit instead of his uniform, which had been taken from him the night of his arrest. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, approached him. "Officer Daniels, please tell the court about your arrangement with Joseph Mendez." Daniels glanced at his lawyer, who nodded slightly. Part of his plea deal required full cooperation. "It started about 2 years ago," Daniels began, his voice barely audible until the judge asked him to speak up. "Joe approached me after I gave one of his bartenders a ticket. He offered to make it go away and pay me extra if I'd look the other way when his customers left the club drunk." "And did you agree to this arrangement?" "Yes. At first, it was just ignoring drunk drivers from his clubs. Then it expanded to warning him about police activity in the area, ignoring drug deals in the parking lot." He paused. "Later, he asked me to pull over young women driving alone at night." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Lily felt her father's hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. "Why would Mr. Mendez want you to do that?" the prosecutor asked. "He said that IDs would help his people make fake IDs for underage customers. He liked the ones that looked a certain way, college-aged, attractive. He'd pay extra for those." Lily shivered. What might have happened if she had handed over her driver's license that night? As the testimony continued, the full extent of the corruption became clear. 5 officers, including Daniels, had been working for Mendez, helping him avoid detection while he ran a network of clubs that served underage patrons and sold drugs. 23 young women had been unlawfully stopped over the past 2 years. Lily's case had been the one that finally exposed everything. When the day's proceedings ended, Lily and her parents stepped outside into the bright afternoon sunlight. Reporters gathered on the courthouse steps and several approached them. "Lily, "Can we get a statement?" one called out. Tom started to step in front of his daughter, but Lily touched his arm and shook her head. "It's okay, Dad. I want to say something." She faced the small crowd of reporters, nervous but determined. "I was lucky," Lily began, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "When Officer Daniels pulled me over and began harassing me, I knew exactly what to do because my father taught me my rights. I had resources and support that many people don't have." The reporters went quiet, pencils poised over notepads. This case isn't just about corrupt officers or nightclub owners. It's about power and how easily it can be abused when nobody's watching. Every citizen deserves protection under the law, regardless of who they are or who they know. From the edge of the crowd, Mike and Detective Wong watched with approval. Behind them stood 3 other young women, the previously silenced victims who had found the courage to come forward after Lily blazed the trail. Later that evening, the Taylor family gathered around their dining table with Mike, Detective Wong, and the department's new chief of police, who had been appointed after the scandal forced her predecessor to resign. "We're implementing new policies," the chief explained as they shared a celebratory meal. "Body cameras that can't be turned off during stops, regular audits of officer activities, and a completely overhauled complaint system." "Will it be enough?" Lily's mother asked. The chief smiled. "It's a start, and we've created a civilian oversight committee. We'd like you to consider joining, Lily, once you finish law school, of course." Lily looked surprised. "Me? Why?" "Because systems only work when courageous people hold them accountable," the chief said. "Your complaint didn't just catch one bad officer, it changed an entire department." As they raised their glasses in a toast, Lily realized something important. What had begun as a frightening confrontation on a dark road had transformed into a force for positive change. Officer Daniels' biggest mistake hadn't just been messing with an FBI agent's daughter, it had been underestimating the power of one person willing to stand up for what's right. And that was a lesson Lily would carry with her for the rest of her life.